right, everybody, we're going to get started with this second session this morning. This session is going to be the who. Oh, sorry, no, wrong one. Oops, sorry about that. This session is going to be the modernization of crossing inventory, NCDOT's rail division, transition from paper forms to field maps. Our speaker is going to be David Mathern. David started working with the DOT back in 2017 as an intern while pursuing his master's in geospatial information science and technology at NC State. After graduating, he was brought on to consult the rail divisions for their GIS needs. Again, please hold all your questions till the end of the presentation. For our online attendees, please enter the questions in the chat, and also be sure to make sure your name is right on your Zoom login to get credit for attending. This session is being recorded and will be made available following weeks.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is David Mathern, here representing the Rail Division. Also here with Todd Meyer, the manager of the Inventory and Data Analysis Unit. Okay. So the Rail Division is divided into 4 branches, which includes operations and facilities, planning and development, design and construction, and the engineering, coordination, and safety branch, which is where we are housed, Inventory and Data Analysis Unit. So the Rail Division works with railroads, federal and state agencies, and communities throughout North Carolina to make railroad crossings safer through engineering and educational efforts. Our engineering efforts include installing traffic control devices, closing and consolidating crossings, and grade separating crossings. Our educational efforts include the B-Rail Safe program and working with our partner Operation Lifesaver, which is a national nonprofit. So we take on these efforts by completing projects and programs which rely on good data. And how do we get good data? Through crossing inventory fieldwork. So I'm going to go through the inventory requirements. So the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, requires that railroad crossings be inventoried once every 3 years. This data is submitted in 3 different ways, either using the grade crossing inventory system, using an application programming interface, or API, or doing batch uploads using spreadsheets. All the large Class 1 railroads use the API, and NCDOT uses the batch upload spreadsheet method. Ultimately, the responsibility of submitting this information is on the railroads, but NCDOT receives some funding from the FRA to support this program. And we also have some agreements with the short line railroads to submit this information on their behalf. And NCDOT also collects some additional information that is not required by the FRA. So in North Carolina, we have just over 3,700 public at-grade crossings that require inventory. They're divided into 3 inventory cycles distributed throughout the states. And our data is stored in an Oracle database that we call the State Authoritative Road and Highway Crossing Database, or SARA. SARA has the ability to print out inventory forms either in NCDOT's format or FRA. Since NCDOT collects a little bit more information, our format's slightly different. It stores project information, crash information, and maintenance information tied to railroad crossings, and also has some built-in tools for project prioritization, and also has the ability to do some data dumps using the spool tool, which is my primary interaction with SARA database. So currently our standard workflow for doing inventory is identifying all the crossings at the beginning of a cycle that need to be inventoried. The day before we got into the field, we print out all the forms on paper. We go into the field, take our red pens, we mark up the forms for any changes. We take photos of the roadway and the railroad and the crossing ID placard. Then when we get back into the office, we use those forms to update the SARA database manually. And then we have to move all our pictures off the camera into a processing folder. And then the forms are given to another technician for the QA/QC process. So we had a previous attempt at a mobile solution. It was called Sarah Offline. And the first mistake we made was deploying Windows 8 tablets. It was a custom-built application by IT. And it basically looked exactly the same as our desktop version of the Sarah Crossing database. It allowed the user to download the whole database to the tablet. And this is the example of the inventory form, and it looks pretty much the same as what you'll see on desktop. So it was a problematic user interface. All the technicians preferred to use paper forms instead of using the tablets, so they basically became paperweights. And it had no GIS capabilities. There was one part of the mobile solution, though, that we did like, and we're planning to implement in our new solution, and that was the QA/QC process. So when the user got back into the office and connected to the database, there was a table of pending updates. If they click on one of those updates, it opens up the inventory form, and any changes you made were denoted by colors on either side of the input field. So the yellow represented that you made some change in the field and allowed you to either accept that change or revert back to the original. And then red, in the rare instance that you went out, made a change, someone in the office also made a change, and then you also have the original value. So you could pick any of those. So once you accepted all the changes, the pending data was moved off of that table and written to the main Sarah database. So after reviewing that process, we wanted to look into using field maps as a future solution. So to start that out, had to prepare the data. In Sarah, we have 208 fields. So I went through all of those, determined all the different data types we had, gave them all field aliases, determined if they needed to be free text or domain controlled, what fields need to be editable in the field, since there's a lot of information that we can update in the office that you're not going to know by doing a field visit. And then finally, publishing data to Arcgis Online. So next went into the settings and the feature service, turned on the editing, enabled attachments for photos, and enabled the sync for offline use. Then created a web map, set up some simple symbology, and set up a search so that technicians can search for crossings using their unique ID. And then finally, start to consider what other data sets might be useful to a field technician. So in this instance, showing the road characteristics, since that's important inventory information, and oftentimes there are not road signs at railroad crossings. Finally, got into building the actual form in field maps. So our paper form has 6 different parts. So I was able to kind of recreate that using the group feature in field maps and organize the data in mostly the same order that technicians would find it on the inventory form. I did move some of the fields to the top of the form because I know from my QA/QCing of the data that sometimes they get missed. So I just put them right in their face when they open the form. And then also started to test out some conditional views using arcade expressions. So in this example here, we have the question asking if there's a adjacent crossing, and currently the value is no. If you change that to yes, a new field appears, and then the technician can enter in that value. So it's just something to kind of control what data gets entered and hopefully eliminate some room for errors. And then finally, kind of went through and reviewed the form again, determined that some of our fields might need to be derived on the back end when putting data back into the Sarah database. Some of our fields, like we have advanced warning signs, and in Sarah, all of those are count fields. And then finally, there's one field that's a list of comma separated values. So we're thinking that, if that count is more than 0, then add it to the list essentially. And then also just testing the form, adding new domains, and then republishing and testing and republishing. So some of the additional features that we like and are planning to use in field maps is the ability to add photo attachments. So elimination of the need to bring a camera into the field and making sure that batteries are charged and everything, have a memory card. Linking to navigational apps. So if you click on the ellipse at the bottom right corner, that pop-up appears. If you click on directions, it allows you to select from any of the navigation applications you have on your phone currently installed to get directions. And the ability to measure features. So in this example here, we're just measuring the crossing length. Another example that would be useful for us is we have a question if there's intersecting highways within 500 feet. And then if that is the case, then how far away it is. And oftentimes that number is pretty inaccurate, bad guess usually. And then another thing that could be potential use is monitoring field technicians' locations just for safety reasons. You know, if someone hasn't moved in, an hour, maybe something's wrong, maybe you should give them a call. So now that we have the form created, our next hurdle was how are we going to get our data from Arcgis Online back into the SARA database? So could we make the Arcgis Online service the authoritative source? No, that probably wouldn't work for us because there's a lot of other rail division units that rely on the SARA database for their information. Could we just export the attribute data as a spreadsheet and do batch uploads? It wouldn't be an ideal solution just because it'd still be a manual process. So how can we automate this transfer of data? So we got in contact with NCDOT GIS unit and NCDIT. We explained our vision and our needs for how we wanted to create this. Told them, when the data is going to be updated, what data we wanted to be updated. And they are helping us make this happen. So far they have created an API to facilitate the data movement. And as of last Friday, we got confirmation that the API can read the feature service and compare to the SARA database. So it was a big breakthrough for us. This is kind of a diagram that we gave to them to kind of explain how we wanted the data to flow. So we have our SARA database down there in the left corner, and it is going to push update records to our GIS feature service. And then our field technicians using field maps will interact with that feature service and make updates. And then on some schedule, we'll plan to push any updated records into a pending update field or table where they can be QA/QC'd and then finally written to the actual SARA database. So we have recognized that the flow of data, the first thing that needs to happen in this is data needs to be pushed from the feature service into the QA/QC table just to ensure that things aren't overwritten before we update the feature service again from SARA. So some of the other future uses we're hoping to do is one thing is managing photos. So we're planning to use the attachments in field maps. And currently the process of moving photos is moving to a processing folder and then into an actual folder. And they have a specific location and naming convention that's required so that the SARA database, as well as our public crossing data, can access those photos. So we've been looking into using a script to move the photos off of the feature service and either into our current location or potentially using a SharePoint site. And another integration we are working on with the GIS unit is creating events for all of our crossings that being located on the roads and highways LRS, since a lot of our crossing information has to do with highway information. So being able to pull that easier, basically, and more frequently. And we have to recognize there might be some potential for automation there as well. If not totally just accepting new updates in the LRS, at least flagging something so we can review it later and either accept or reject those updates. And we're also just hoping that this could potentially add more value to other LRS users. So this is an example of one of our internal web maps. This is we call the SARA web app. It uses the same crossing data. So currently I update that manually on Thursdays, so I'll be doing that later today. And once we have our data flow all set up, then we'll not have to update it any longer. And another one of our dashboards is called the inventory cycle dashboard. Again, same crossing data is feeding this. I've used some arcade expressions, set up a symbology so you can see what crossings have been inventoried, what crossings need to be inventoried, and if crossings go beyond that 3-year time frame. So my colleagues in the BRL Safe program would be upset if I didn't address railroad safety, and it also happens to be Operation Lifesavers Rail Safety Week. So every 3 hours, a person or a vehicle is struck by a train in the US, and there are approximately 1,200 deaths on US train tracks each year, according to Operation Lifesaver. This is kind of the general statistics we'll see in North Carolina year over year. In 2020, there was a slight decrease, mostly because of COVID, but it went right back up in 2021. So some driving safety tips. Trains always have the right of way. You would think this is a no-brainer, but don't stop your car on railroad tracks. You know, you'd be surprised how many times just being out in the field, you'll see people just stop right on the tracks. Never drive around gates. Again, something you think is no-brainer, but reading so many incident reports, that's almost always in the narrative. And if you are on the tracks and the gates start to go down, do whatever you can to get off the tracks. The gates are designed to lift up or break away if you try to drive through them. So some pedestrian safety tips. The only safe and legal place to cross a railroad is at a designated crossing. Railroad tracks are private property, so technically if you are on them without permission, you are trespassing and could potentially get a ticket. Do not cross tracks immediately after a train passes. There may be a second train coming. And never walk or ride a bike on or near railroad tracks. And finally, if a vehicle you or someone else gets immobilized on a railroad crossing, look for the blue sign. They are posted at all railroad crossings. They have an emergency contact number and a unique crossing ID that you'll want to give the operator on the other end of that line. So, all right, thank you very much. Here's contact information. And I'll take any questions. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The question was whether why we were using field maps over Survey 123. We've tried Survey 123 a little bit, and we just preferred the map-centric interface in field maps. Yep. The question was, what kind of database is Sarah? It is an Oracle database. The question was whether we considered using an enterprise instead of our current workflow. So I think that would just require more time and investment and money to develop like an enterprise system. And since NCDOT already has one, I don't think they'd really want the rail division having their own as well. Yep. So the question was if we had considered using Python to help automate the process. I guess I am not as skilled in Python as I would like to be. And I'm not sure what programming languages our IT people are using for that transition of data. Yeah. Question was, what is a trespasser? So, like I had mentioned, railroads are private property. So anyone who does not have authorization from the railroad to be on that property is technically a trespasser. So the trespasser incidents in that stat are those people. Um, So I guess the question was, uh, yeah, I guess publishing and republishing the data. Yes, that there was a lot of iterative process of publishing something and then um, creating more domains generally to make drop-down boxes within the field maps inventory form, and then republishing the data until it was how we want it to look in the form and everything. I think there was the question was, is there someone named Sarah at the Rail Division? The database was built long before I became to the Rail Division, but I believe there actually was someone named Sarah. I don't know that they were involved in the creation of the database. Yeah. Mhm. The question was, how are people accepting of the current method if they didn't like the past method? So far, it has been good. I think, especially with the Windows 8 tablets, it was a obnoxious amount of sign-ins you had to do just to get onto the tablet, just because NCDOT has strict sign-in procedures and security. So transitioning to something like an iPhone or an iPad or even some Android device that's provided by work or whatever, you kind of control that. And especially with like iPhones now with Face ID, like you can just use that to sign in to field maps. Just really streamline that sign-in process. Um, and just that, I think the Windows 8 tablets were just not a good solution. I had tried to a couple years ago just try to like reutilize them, just trying to run a basic the Sarah web app on there in a browser, and they couldn't even handle that. Um, so we have one oh how many inspectors do we have is the question, and if they were involved in the development. Um, so we have one kind of full-time inspector and then a couple of us who go out if there's a need for that. So I do have some experience doing inventory, and I think that kind of gave some benefit to when creating the form. And we have gone over it a couple of times. So far, they've been accepting of it. And yeah, I just think it'll be a much more streamlined process, especially in the back end, having to enter all that data back into the Sarah database. That could be, an hour or 2 year time, and you can just connect and have it all autonomously done.